Going live there. As everything comes on, I'm Dr. Paul Dyer. Welcome to Freedom Fight. We have a podcast, and we've been out for a little bit because we've been busy. There's a lot of stuff that has been going on, and we want to catch up. But as you can see behind me, it's the Memorial Day. Or that's Arlington, actually. If most of you people don't know, and hopefully some of you do. Some of you do know. But how you been? How you been, Josh? You have Joe up there, you know.
Yeah. Joseph is my full name, a government name, if you will. So go by Joe. But no, been doing well. And it's been busy for us all. It's been a busy, past year and change. And especially for what it is that we're talking about here. What we know is that a lot of folks across the country like to talk about we've been dealing with COVID, and that's true. We have been.
Right.
It's been definitely the thing that's been on the entire world's mind. But another one of the things, and one of the things that dragged me through a bit of a journey on my own end was taking a look at some of the things that's been going on in Black America over the same period of time, and as it relates to that, I mean, it's a little bit of a mixed bag. I'm doing okay. We fortunately were able to see some important legal ramifications come to some people that deserved it, but not long after we received some of that, we saw some of the same behaviors perpetrated in other parts of the country.
Mm-hmm.
And we continue to see that today. So I'm all right. But I do hope that, as we continue to talk about things like this, as we continue to educate folks, as we continue to bring in allies into the fold, and as we continue to do the good work to help Black America, that I'll be better and that better days are to come.
A lot of people talk about mental health, and I do a lot of shows on mental health and things like that, and I'm concerned about mental health. When you're saying you're doing okay, is okay enough?
Yeah,
isn't it all right for you to say? Because I know, like several weeks ago, I was like not okay, and I actually don't remember what was going on, but there was a period I was just not okay, and I said that on air. I'm like, we had a show, Black Coffee Conversations, and just us men got together on air, on live, and said we're just not okay. We're not okay, and that I think for America, for Black communities, we definitely have to say we're not okay.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good point. First of all, let me acknowledge your point about mental health. So as a prior service, Army prior service soldier myself, and from from a family that's Black folk from the South, mental health is not always something that we take as seriously as we need to. I try to do pretty good about it. I try to give myself those mental health breaks, and I try to make sure that I am doing okay. And when I say okay, I mean okay.
Right.
But I think truly it's hard sometimes, when we look at the complexities of the world, as we already talked about COVID, as we already made reference to George Floyd and Derek Chauvin and some of the things that have been going on in that space. I think it's hard, Dr. Paul, to say that we're doing great. It's.
I hope we don't say that, because that would be a bald-faced lie.
Right.
They're like, dude, you lying.
Yeah. And like it's funny that you mentioned this. I on one of my deployments, I was actually there doing some work in some hurricane zones that were devastated from that would have been Hurricanes Irma and Maria a few years back. And we were there with some Swedish folks that were there to help us out with the logistics. And one of the things that I thought was really funny is like the guy's name was Oman, and I was talking to him and I said, hey Oman, how you doing? And he said, in my culture, when somebody says how you doing, sometimes it turns into a 20 to 30 minute conversation because we actually answered the question. I noticed that here in America, we were down in the Caribbean islands, but still obviously the United States of America. People just say, I'm doing fine and keep it moving. Well, maybe we should do a little bit more of the Swedish model.
Yes.
And maybe we should talk about it. And I'm glad that, I'm here, having the conversation with you today, because, we're as you said, we're certainly not great, but there has been some progress. We have some minor victories, in some cases some major victories, and I think that we should celebrate that, not only because it's the right thing to do, but it's the right example to set, and it's good for our mental health. So I think that there's a couple different facets to this, but I do think that hopefully we're heading on the right path. You asked about me personally. Thank you for that. I think that I am okay, but I think that I am weary just looking at the amount of work that we have before us.
And I do put that, I want you to put that on a simmer on the work we have before us. I will be remiss not to mention that the 100-year anniversary of Tulsa, Oklahoma. I was talking to someone a week ago about this coming up because I was writing this paper. I write articles for these different magazines, and I was writing about different tragedies that creates trauma in Black America, right?
Sure.
A lot of Black people who are not well-read or well-versed still miss a ton of massacres and riots that was perpetrated on the Black community. Tulsa has to be a big one. And yet there was a person I was talking to, Black and white, knew nothing about it. And I was like, really? And they're like, no, hey, Dr. P, I said, okay, you mean the whole Black Wall Street? Yeah, I used to see the hashtags, and I just thought there was just Black people, making. I said, so did it ever spark what are they really talking about, Black Wall Street? Like, what are we referring to? And he was like, nah, it was just like, I just kept flipping through my little thing like that. I was like, okay, so now I'm bothered on two accounts because I hope to put out things that hopefully it pauses you enough to go, I don't know what that is. Let me investigate.
Right.
So we still have American people, white, Black, and whoever, still don't know about Tulsa. Until recently, maybe if they heard Biden talk about how he was going to give a speech. But to not know that actually hurts, because this is why we continue to fall into the trap. We continue to fall into the fold of not doing, because people still just don't know.
It's exactly right. And it's an unfortunate reality of this great country that we call the United States of America. And I do believe, by the way, that it is a good country, a great country, in fact. Wouldn't have fought for it otherwise. But that does not mean that we don't have work to do, as I mentioned before. And as you talk about Greenwood, specifically the neighborhood within Tulsa, that was just absolutely razed to the ground. One of the things I think that is an important point there, Dr. Paul, is what are we teaching in our schools, right? Because I think we do a little bit of 1, 2, skip a few, 99 United States, and obviously there's a huge debate, and some of our governors, especially in particular in the South or in the Mountain West, are opposed to what they call critical race theory being taught in our schools.
They're calling it socialism.
And
I could not believe it. I heard it on the radio. I pulled over.
Yeah.
I pulled over to a stoplight, and I looked at the radio. I was like, okay, the tactics of weaponizing a word to turn it against itself, it's pretty brilliant.
Yeah, it is a particularly effective political move,
right? But
as it relates to the health of our democracy, to the health of our population, to the health of our people, and when I say the health of, I mean an informed democracy is a functioning democracy.
Correct.
And I think that it is important to have these conversations. I'll give you a very trivial example to remove this out of the concept of race just for a moment. I had a conversation with my better half recently, and there was just this one thing. I won't go into.
I hope she hears this, because you just got points. Come on,
absolutely.
Right.
Ashley, if you're listening, and I'll definitely send her the video, but Ashley, definitely want to call her out. But we were having a conversation about just a couple things. It's just this one thing that I just really wish you wouldn't do. Now, every man who has a significant other that's a woman, and yet anybody who's in a long-term relationship knows that sometimes these conversations are hard to have, but ultimately can very well lead to a much closer, much more honest, much more holistic, much more complete relationship. And one of the reasons for that is because we have the conversation.
Yes.
No secrets, no hiding. Their relationships can be built in different ways, but that's how I see mine. And I think that's an important factor in mine. So why is that relationship that I have with Ashley any different than the relationship that I have with my country? And I think that these are important things that we really need to make sure that we're talking about, to put it back in the context of race, because if folks are tired of having these conversations, maybe we should finally stop talking about them and do something about them. But in order to do that, we have to first make sure that everybody's on the same page.
And what does that mean? When we talk about it, because we're still hashing it out, socialism, critical race theory. How about education of the history of America and what it didn't do? Not also just what it did. There's a lot of stuff it just didn't do.
That's right. That's right. And yeah, you throw all of these politically charged labels into everything. And by the way, both sides are guilty of it. It's not just our Republican colleagues that are doing this. We're both guilty of it. It's just the environment that we live in. But I do think that, as I've said before, it's important to have those conversations, because at that point, and in this lowly soldier's opinion, at only that point do we ever have a hope of moving past it and moving forward beyond it. And so, to the folks in the majority who may be opposed to this line of conversation, who may be opposed to educating their children about the sins of this country's past, well, I mean, you're going to continue to get protests. You're going to continue to get, you're going to continue to get this tension between, the police, which, by the way, many scholars look at the historical context of what policing came from in this country, and it looked a little bit like slave chasers to start off. So, I mean, let's just have a conversation here about what it is that we're talking about, because then maybe we can actually identify what it is about policing that's going so wrong, at least in the public eye. And by the way, I'm a part of I'm an EMT, or an EMT in training, I should say. Don't give myself too much credit. And the volunteer membership chair he works for the sheriff's office. I, Black man, EMT in training, have to work with this gentleman who, in his part-time volunteer gig, is my lieutenant, my leader, and during his 9 to 5 is a cop. We have to be able to work together in this world. And we need to be able to communicate with each other. We need to be able to work with each other.
And I have a show with James Spearman, who was a 33-year-old veteran police officer here in Maryland. And we have Talking to the Sarge. And we have these conversations because it isn't the police force. It's the people who are in it who are not well or good. So we have, and it is our relationship as a community, as Black community, with the police force. It isn't a healthy one. I know that from a childhood, from being pulled over with a basketball when I'm 10 years old, walking with my cousins, being, just checking us out, patting us down in the 70s. This is something that just went on and on and on. So we don't have a good relationship with the police force in the United States. So, and we definitely have to have them. We're not looking at a society without a police force. Right. I mean, I think sometimes people say we're looking to defund them to not have them. They're totally misrepresenting us when they're saying that, because it's just not true.
Right. And I think we saw that did some damage to the Democratic Party recently. Although, the presidency, the House and the Senate are all in Democratic control, I think there was an argument to be made that some of that, you go back to the socialism point that you raised earlier. I mean, some lines of messaging don't work everywhere. And so I think that is something on a political front that we have to be aware of. But let's also talk from the human front, right?
Yes.
Because honestly, and as you alluded to, I want to be able to call the police if I'm in trouble and expect that as a member of the community, I will receive help just like any other member of the community. And so from that standpoint, I certainly wouldn't want to defund the police, but I do think that it is important to acknowledge, and living here in Maryland, there are a number of counties that are doing some variation of this. I think it is important to acknowledge that maybe every time somebody calls 911, the police don't need to show up.
Right.
You have crisis response teams, mobile crisis response teams to deal with mental health issues, mental health outbreaks that folks may have. Homelessness, I don't see as a police related issue, unless there is violence involved. In most cases, there isn't. Individuals that may or may not be on the spectrum, that are ultimately, unfortunately and ultimately killed on scene. I just don't know that we always need to incorporate the police into all of this. And I think the police would agree that sometimes, a sheriff's deputy or
they don't need to be there.
End up and they end up saying, why am I here? I think that some of this lends the opportunity for another type of resource. And I'm not saying send social workers to a shooting. That's not what I'm saying. But I am saying that social workers have a place in this country and in this world, and that people need help sometimes. And help is not handcuffs.
And help shouldn't be a bad word. Help should not mean jail time. You're right. Help should not mean being shot. Help does just mean help. If we are not able to ask for help, then we hold things in, and we're going right back to that mental health, right? Because if we feel like we can't say something, then nothing gets done. And then when it explodes, it's something very bad.
Very, very bad. And that's when you see a lot of times the violence is incorporated into it, when individuals take matters into their own hands because they feel that they can't trust the institutions around them. And so I think that what we're talking about here is a 400-year problem, but we're also talking about a slope that can still get even more slippery. And one that I think that we are ripe for trying to address, and many jurisdictions are attempting that. I think that there are some jurisdictions, in fairness to my brothers and sisters on the right, that are going a little too far, right? But I think that unfortunately, when you have 400 years of struggle, I think that eventually you should expect that pendulum will very quickly swing into the other side. And so I think that that's a lot of what's happening there as it relates to some of the overreaction. But at the end of the day, no matter how you want to talk about it, no matter how you want to politicize it, I think that both our majority and minority brothers and sisters would agree that some conversations need to be had and some things need to be done to really relax some of the tension that we see as it relates to the Black communities across this country and some of the policing practices that are being engaged in those communities.
And I think if we're going to have this conversation, how do we, I don't think enough people understand the difference between conversation and political rhetoric.
Right.
And I think that gets so mixed into the Kool-Aid that a lot of stuff either gets watered down or sweetened up. It's either one or the two, but then it does take away from the conversation. It's because conversations aren't political unless you politicize it, right? Or unless you weaponize it. And we have to figure out, education is now weaponized. I think education was always weaponized. Why? Because it was segregated. If you segregate something, that means you want it intended for something so the others do not have. So it was sort of slighted in a lot of ways of being weaponized anyway. But now education should be a way to communicate the fullness to all, right? At a younger age, so they all get immersed in the understanding of what it is, not the one side or the other side. Is that possible?
That is a tough question. Here's what I'll say. I hope it is. I really do, because not that I want everyone to feel bad about what has happened in our country's past.
Yeah.
But I would like a general understanding of what has happened in our country's past when I speak from a certain perspective. Or when you speak from a certain perspective, or when our female colleagues speak from a certain perspective.
Native Americans,
our Latino and Latinx and Hispanic communities. How about our Asian communities in today's world? Listen, it's not. To me, I just want us to be speaking from and singing from the same sheet of music, you know? And I think that education has a really important factor. It is a really important factor in that. And not to mention, by the way, just outside of the context of race, it is really difficult to make a living without a good quality education in this world. It's really difficult. We've seen that once you get that education, you can completely delete it from your mind, as we see from some of our senators from Texas, you know, and maybe some other places. But you know, it's still to get to that point. And of course, I'm talking about Ted Cruz, so I'll go ahead and call his name.
Yes, you are. Yeah, hey, if you didn't know people, catch the Ted Cruz comment.
Yeah, you know, I every now and again I like to drop a little reference, but you know, that's an educated brother right there. Harvard educated, you know, has won cases before the Supreme Court. You cannot say that Ted Cruz is not an accomplished man, right? And he needed that education to get that far. Now, of course, now that he's a senator, he forgot his brain. But you know, to the point for me,
does Harvard call him back and say, we need to rescind this?
Listen, I think that would set a problematic precedent for our institutions of higher learning. What we know is that there's quite a few successful people out there who have acted in ways that may be less than honorable, but that may also be involved in providing a significant endowment to some of these universities. Okay. So money talks. And actually, if I may, Dr. Paul, speaking of money talks, one of the things that I was really hoping to mention during this conversation between you and I was, and we've spoken about this offline, but I think the importance of economic mobility, economic development, financial literacy, these things I think are really crucial to not only communities of color and minority communities, but just people in general in this country and in this world. Money talks, and this is a capitalist society. And so you take a look at, you know, education, I think is an important first step, but I think that you use that education to gain financial independence. You gain financial independence, you start being able to create your own rules for your life.
Because that's the real segregation is economics.
Absolutely.
That's the true segregation right there is economics and classism.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. I think that's it's hard to move when you don't have financial hope. It is hard to move. I mean, we don't have a class system like some of maybe you know, some of the other countries, you know, maybe you take a look at the caste system in India and other places. You know, true caste, like you were born there, you can't move.
You're done.
You're done, right? And obviously, you know, who am I to judge someone else's culture? But that does seem problematic to me. But how am I going to be able to, in good faith, criticize that community and that way of life when you look at Black and brown and beige communities across the country and there's no upward mobility for them either? So, you know, I think that this is an important one. And I really hope that one of the things, my personal missions, as we've discussed before, one of my personal missions is to really help move the needle on that economic development for communities that look like the one that I came from, right? There is not a lot of difference between myself and maybe some of the community members that were kind of more or less forced to stay on the block. I was not necessarily the best behaved. I was not necessarily the smartest. I was not necessarily the most talented, but I had a series of things go right in my life that led to doors opening up, that led to opportunities. And those opportunities are what allowed me to work, you know, in the Obama administration and the Department of Commerce, right, that allowed me to do the great work that I did with the American Red Cross, and that now allow me to create or to help create educational opportunities for underrepresented high schools. I would not have had that ability had it not been for the shots that I got. And I think that maybe we can focus on, instead of asking for our rights or saying, please give us civil rights, maybe we move the needle on the money, and that way we can stop asking. Because with that money comes power. And I hope that we'll be able to do that. I hope that the members of the community that are able to cross that path lower the ladder, because that is a key problem in the Black community that I see that we're just not doing enough. And so, you know, I think that this space that we're talking about here, Dr. Paul, I think is an important one.
You know, that's why, you know, I joined 100 Black Men. I know you're in the process of doing that and coming on board, and we're so happy to have you. I can speak that just from what I know. When we lower the ladder, there's difference between, you still have to reach up. And we will always go get you, but that doesn't mean it's a handout. Don't get it twisted, right? And I think that's where the education piece comes in. Just because I'm helping you up is different than a handout. A helping hand is different than a handout. And I think some people do fall into the emotional mental trap of asking for a hand up and not just a helping hand.
Yeah, no, I think this is a really important point because we do want, I mean, just to borrow from the old adage of pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, which I think is bastardized in this country far too often. But I do think that it is an important point. You know, I can bring you to the water, but that does not mean I can make you drink. And so, you know, I do think it's important for our young people, and thank God that I had a mom that not only instilled it, but literally beat it into my head a few times, to make sure that I stayed hungry. I stayed hungry, and yeah, because of Maddie Miller. Never forget it. Never forget that lesson. Stay hungry. Stay ambitious. Keep shooting. Listen, if I end up shooting for the stars and I land in the trees, that is significantly higher than I was. And so, you know, that's an important point.
My mother used to say, "What's next?" Mm-hmm. That was her phrase. Mom, it doesn't matter what I did. It literally does not matter what I did. Score this, A this, B this, jump over the hedge with one leg. Okay, what's next?
Yeah.
And so that's that, man, there is another level. There's another level to this, right? There isn't just here, it's there. And it's not just a promised land of wishes and dreams, but what's next for you.
Yeah. And I think that's a part of that hunger. I call it hunger. Your mom called it what's next. It's, you know, different ways to say the same thing. But I do think, so on the one hand, I think that that's really important because you're right. We have to lower the ladder, but we can't necessarily lower it to the ground because we're a little higher up. So we do have to expect that there will be some meeting in the middle. I get told all the time though, and Ashley, just to call her out again, she's good for telling me though, to celebrate the wins. I'm one of these people that believes that you shouldn't celebrate what you should do. Right. So for example, and you may have different feelings about this, but I don't. I did not walk for my college graduation. I graduated from Purdue. I studied economics, political science, peace studies, and global studies. Quite the accomplishment, but it was what I was supposed to do. Maddie Miller put me on the path to graduate from college before she passed away. And I was certainly not going to disappoint her, especially after her untimely death. And so I didn't walk. I didn't felt that I had done anything special. Now I may be different than some other folks, you know,
You're not different from me because I was like, so what? Move on.
Yeah, I didn't necessarily say so what. I saw it as a necessary step in my path. And the reason I say that is because without that degree, I mean, the next thing that I did, to your mom's point, what's next? Well, what was next for me is I hopped on the plane and I went to DC to work for the Obama administration. But you best believe that wouldn't have happened had I not gotten that degree from Purdue.
Right.
And so, you know, I think that it is important that we focus on what's next, but at the same time, and for our own mental health, mental stability, and community health and community mental health stability, I think it's important that we breathe every now and again, celebrate our successes, and then move to the next point. Because we don't want to move the goalpost too quickly. We'll forget that we actually did anything in the first place.
What's the economic steps that, not that you foresee, that listen careful, people, because I don't use this word because it's a hammer. What needs to be done now? And need is a hammer that I am throwing at the table because we don't have that much time left to lollygag.
Yeah.
So what's now?
Yeah, that's a good question. From my perspective, I think there's a number of things that we can do simultaneously to various groups, or with various groups, maybe is a better way to say that, that'll help move the needle. On the one hand, you know, I think that it's important to always start with our youth, right? Because the youth are the future. You and I are going to be gone at some point, and it's going to be the responsibility of the people who come after us to continue what it is that we started. That's how I see my situation with my mother. That's how I, you know, see the generations behind me continuing what I hope to start. So starting with the youth, I think, is important. And as it relates to the youth, I think that our high schools and our guidance counselors and our parents that are worth a damn, and the village, if you will. I think that these folks not only have to continue doing the good work that they're doing, but also incorporate into that some aspect of financial literacy. I think that it's really important that we get our young kids start talking about checking accounts. I think that it's really important that we get our young kids start talking about budgeting. I think it's really important that we sow these seeds early on. Great programs include Operation Push's financial literacy courses for young people. I think Junior Achievement is another really, really powerful, impactful course that you can bring into local high schools free of charge. Volunteers come in and just take 45 minutes to teach about these things, maybe once a week, once every 2 weeks, something like that. I think that it's really important that we start having these conversations young, so that when these folks start getting into the real world and the work world, they know what to do. And maybe if they win the lottery, they don't end up broke in a year and a half.
Here's why the lottery winners end up broke in a year and a half are people who hit a contract for whatever reason on whatever sport or whatever business, they're broke, is because we also have a negative trauma effect to money. We do not have a good relationship, also like the police force and the police officers. We do not, as a Black community, have a good relationship with ourselves and what money is. We look at money as the root of all evil, but economics is not an evil way. Economics is different than just gaining money. Economics is different. Economic comes in all shapes, comes in trade, it comes in worth and value, right? The GDP, right? It doesn't say gross domestic money, it says gross domestic product. Product means things, people, policies also can use money, but it's not just the dollar bill or the coin. And I think that's where it got confused between economics and money. They're not the same thing.
Yeah, I think you raise a good point there, and I think I would be remiss. I can hear some of my family members in my head talking about what I think you called earlier the trauma of the history as it relates to these things, right? So you look back in time, and Black folks and brown folks weren't really allowed to have land, weren't really allowed to own property, weren't really allowed to make financial decisions in the same way that folks are today. And so there's a little bit of a hesitancy. And when there's not a hesitancy, there's just a general lack of knowledge as to how to deal with money, because money is a resource and a commodity, just like anything else, that if you misuse it, it will do you no good. Right. And with money, it can actually do you quite some harm if you make enough wrong turns. And so I think that is an important thing to start having those conversations early. Another one of the things I think it's really important is I think the mindset that particularly the Black community has around money, I really hope to see evolve and change in relatively short order. And I know that we're talking about the short term here, but, just in my own family, I'm having conversations about, for example, don't fear the stock market, right? Study it, appreciate it, respect it as something that can cause you some damage, but certainly don't fear it, because our white brothers and sisters have gotten into the habit of letting their money make money.
That's right.
And that is the difference. Black folks work for their money. Yeah. Some white folks, their money works for them. And so I think that it's really important to instill these concepts. So for example, I remember when probably all of 7, 8 years old, I was standing in front of the house that I referenced earlier that my family is now in the process of cleaning out. And I was standing next to my uncle. Now, this is not an uncle by blood. This is an uncle by marriage, but still someone who considers me to be a son. And I'm very thankful of that. Uncle John Johnson, very, very good guy, Howard graduate, great guy. And he talked to me about his history of investing in real estate and how he used his homes as a way to maintain his wealth and increase his value. And so, he would sell a home, finish off the rest of the mortgage or whatever the case may be, and use the proceeds to put a down payment on a bigger house. And so now he's to the point where it's just he and my aunt, in this just huge house along with my grandmother. But that really is a store of wealth. It's not that they need all of that space, but that's a store of wealth that appreciates over time. Mm-hmm. And so that's just one example of just how one Black couple, my aunt and uncle, we're able to, just start out really, really small with a 1 bedroom, 1 bath apartment in rural Maryland, and eventually work their way up to living in the richest Black county in America, which is Prince George's County, with a really nice home and one that I can only, aspire to at this point in my life. I hope to get there one day, but right now it's just all like pie in the sky for me. And so I say all of this to say, and I bring in these personal anecdotes because, I want to just point out that this can be done. And this is something that is attainable within the Black community. It's going to take some effort. It's going to take some changes in the way that we think, especially as we think about money. When you get money, you might need to spend it immediately. But if you don't, what are you going to do with the rest of it? Are you going to put it in your mattress, which some people still do?
Are you going to put it? It's not a joke. They still do.
It's not a joke at all.
No.
It's not a joke at all. Some people, I actually, as a member of the American Red Cross, by the way, quick disclaimer, I may be wearing the Red Cross insignia. I may be making some references to it, but just to put it out there, these opinions are my own and do not represent the thoughts and positions of the American Red Cross. But I will make a reference to an experience I had with the Red Cross as I was responding to a multifamily fire. A gentleman lost his life savings because it burned down because he kept it in his mattress and in his closet. Tragic. No insurance, no life savings gone. I have no idea what happened to that individual. I can't imagine he lasted much longer, to be quite honest with you, though, Dr. Paul. And so, I think that, you take a look at that, but even some of the less ridiculous examples. Are you going to put your money in a low interest bearing account, just a regular old savings account that Chase or Bank of America just hopes that you drop the money in so they can loan out your money at 10, 15, 18% and pay you 0.002? And so, these are the types of things that I've come across in my life and studying what I studied and just being a part of what I've been a part of. Now I'm an investor myself. I have a diverse portfolio and things like that. And I'm not yet 30, but I will say, though, that it did take me some time to learn these things and to implement these things. And I must say that I'm quite envious about, towards some of our younger folks who are, I looked at the thing and unfortunately, I can't come up with her name right now, but young Black woman, the first young Black woman to be on the New York Stock Exchange trading on the floor. I think she was all of 22, 23 years old. Now that young woman, that's what I'm talking about right there, Dr. Paul. And I hope that she will be an example, not only for at least compared to her old farts like us, but also, the younger generations that come after her. Like, look, this is something you can do. And for as much trouble as Robin Hood gets into sometime, I will say that the ease of which a company like that makes it for people to trade money and to trade stocks and things like that, they have, again, gotten themselves into some trouble, but really lowered the bar for the average man, for the average woman, for the average 18-plus-year-old to really start thinking about these things and to make some mistakes on the lower level, and then hopefully not to repeat those mistakes as you start talking about more and more money. These things are important. And to answer your question, Dr. Paul, long answer to a short question, I think these are the types of things that we can do in the short term to move the needle on the economic situation within our Black, brown, and beige communities.
We're losing 7 million kids this year because of education, because of COVID. That's a tragic number that I am not sure there's a boomerang effect to this. Of whatever COVID did, there's an effects coming, right? There's a hangover coming from COVID on many levels.
Yep.
We're not looking for the boogeyman, but we can prosper in this. We can achieve higher levels of earnings and yields because of COVID. There's a lot of stuff that we as a community can snatch up together. Take back our city streets, take back our broken cities, because they're willing to sell off because the counties are broke. They need money. So it's an opportunity.
That is a really interesting point. And I think that you're right. You take a look at some of these city-owned properties that have been, kind of shuttered in the first place. And then as like you said, budgets need to make up the difference. People aren't working, people aren't paying their taxes, people aren't going out, people aren't paying their sales taxes. People aren't necessarily drinking as much in the bars and things like that. So people aren't paying their alcohol taxes, gas taxes, like these types of things are really hurting local revenues. And there are some funds that are traveling down thanks to the current administration and things of this nature. But what we know is that some of these communities are still hurting, and particularly some of these communities that weren't receiving these resources anyway. So there exists the possibility for some of the members of our community really starting investing in these communities. I mean, you take a look at again, not a member of the Black, Brown, and Beige community, but you take a look at Jay Farney and what he, the Quicken Loans guy, the Rocket Mortgage guy, what he did in some parts of Detroit. Let me just say, Dr. Paul, I when I was working for the Department of Commerce, I worked in economic development, and so we took a look at economically distressed communities. There is a big difference, in this case, literally across the train tracks, from where Jay Farney invested and where he did not, where he bought up some of that dilapidated property and where he did not. There is a big difference. And so you were absolutely right. There exists the possibility. I really hope that some of our I'm going to call them Black icons, but some of our folks that within our community that have the money, I hope that they make some of those investments. And while I'm happy to see dollars going to the Thurgood Marshall College Fund, I think it's pretty safe to say that a multitude of our HBCUs probably saw better endowments this year than
ever,
since ever, like you said. So I think that these are really important things, but I really hope that some of these organizations that are making these large investments into things that are a little bit more meta also make some tangible, tactical, on the ground investments in communities directly. Because what we know is that, for example, I was just reading an article in my Google News about how there are some areas in Houston, because of the way that the Land Commission is set up in Texas. Mm-hmm. By the way, George Bush is the land commissioner in Texas, George P. Bush. And some of the communities in Houston are not getting some of those funds.
They're not getting anything. And I have boots on the ground in Houston who I talk to, and it's dilapidated is a soft word. It's turned into Beirut. And that's the scary part. I think we're so disconnected from our other cities, our other people, and we think, well, my neighborhood's doing well. Did you look across town? Did you look into another state, another city? Instead of us saying, that's not my problem, it is a community problem, because if it's happening there, it will circle around and eventually happen here. So understanding how it's happening you may not be able to fix why it's happening, but understand how it's happening. That's a difference.
Absolutely. And I think that goes back to the points earlier that we were talking about, just speaking from the same sheet of music, making sure that everybody has the same information so that we can have an honest conversation. Now, the conversation honestly goes, those aren't Republican voters. That's honestly how that conversation goes. But one of the things that's really interesting is, if you were to invest in a community, you don't think that would swing some votes? And I think another one of the things that I think is interesting as it relates to this concept is if you take a look at how profits, from the business perspective, how profits are accumulated. Sure, one of the things that you could do is lower your costs. One of the things you can do is raise your prices. But if you were to expand the base of people,
correct,
that could buy your product,
yes, you could lower your cost.
You lower your cost, you could raise your prices, and that is a wider base of people that have to buy from you. That is more money.
Now you increase transportation, right? Because if more people are buying, you increase transportation. Transportation has a taxation to it.
That's right.
So you have a revenue coming back.
That's right. So there really is good sense to be made sometimes, not all the time, but there really is good sense to be made in doing the right thing and to making sure that people are actually able to sustain themselves. Bill Gates is in a little bit of hot water right now, but one of the things that he said that I thought was very interesting was something to the effect of, I don't believe that India will ever be able to live up to its full potential because half of the population is completely disenfranchised. In that case, we're not talking about the caste system. We're not talking about the racial system. We're talking about men versus women. Right.
Yep.
And so, I mean, I think that goes to the point. Bill Gates, for all his problems, is a very smart man, very accomplished man that knows what he's talking about. Yep. And he basically makes the same point. Let more people participate and you will get more benefit.
Here's the other thing. One of the things I've known, and I'm not, I've never been a car person, and I get teased in the Black community of not waxing my car every week. I literally get made fun of. I don't know why, but I say I'd rather spend. I'm not saying I don't take care of my stuff, but I'm not sensationalizing my stuff. Does that make sense? I was just recently reading about 2 weeks ago. Warren Buffett drives I think an older Cadillac, right? It's something like a 2012 Cadillac. Now, if people don't know who Warren Buffett is, shame on you. I'm not going to explain it to you. If this man drives an old Cadillac and you're looking at buying a Lexus because you just got a raise, you should check yourself because something's off. Where are you putting your money and where are you putting your assets? And where are you putting your ass is really what you're doing.
That's right. That's right. My uncle, the same one that I referenced earlier, he's a very financially intelligent individual. And so one of the things that he says is you can live in your car if you really need to, but do you want to? And so, I think, we all like to have nice things. And again, I think that it's important to celebrate the successes. And sometimes that means nice things. But another name that Warren Buffett goes by is the Oracle of Omaha. And one of the reasons for that is because I won't mention the Oracle part because again, people should know who this is. And if you don't look at Warren Buffett. But he does live in Omaha and he lives in a very, I won't say small house, but small compared to what he could live in.
It's modest.
Yeah, it is extraordinarily modest. And I believe it is the home that, he bought. It was probably one of the first homes that he bought. And he just continued to work on it as opposed to buying $1 million property or $1 billion property or whatever. And he's a fiscally frugal man. And I'm not sure that everyone is going to be that. I'm probably even less frugal than even Warren Buffett is. But I do think, to your point, I do think that it is important, similar to what I had said before, about where you put your money. Mm-hmm. So in my eyes, I don't know that there's a lot of difference in putting your money in a mattress or in a car if you can't afford either one.
Right.
If you need to be, if you're in a situation in which you're in essence working almost paycheck to paycheck, and the difference between the end of your check and the end of your bills you're putting towards a car that's nicer than one you need, I think that a conversation should be had about that. Again, people are free to spend their money however they please. That is a right of being born in this country. But I do think as we look at the Black community, and as we look at maybe some of the individuals that tease you for not waxing your car every week, I think we want to make sure that we got it like that before we start spending it like that.
And I think that's why they look to the Black community. I wonder if Black people know this too, or the Black and brown community knows this, because everybody else knows it, that they actually look to them to spend over the money they don't have, charge it, create debt, just so they can have things. And they bring these companies out of debt with Black money. Blacks spend the most money in the United States and have the least. It's literally what an insane action thought. Per capita Black spending, it tends to be pretty high. Per capita Black saving tends to be pretty low. Now some of that, Dr. Paul, is related to the fact that there's not a lot of, like I said, there's not a lot of difference in a lot of cases between the end of your check and the end of your bills. So that's one of the reasons that we see that. Okay. But honestly, I think what you're getting at is that even when that's not the case, we don't spend as intelligently as we could. And I think this goes back to the point I made earlier about financial literacy, preparing folks for these conversations very early on. And then when folks are ready, talking about budgeting, talking about checking and savings account, talking about high interest accounts, talking about investing, talking about CDs, talking about treasury bonds and all of these. Well, treasury bonds are not having a good time right now. Those interest rates aren't super high. But the point being is I think these types of investment instruments exist for a reason. And I think if we look across to our majority brothers and sisters, again, we've seen over time that once a lot of these folks make some money, they make money for them. And I think that is ultimately one of the goals that I think that we really need to put in place in the Black community. I think it starts with putting together some of these early conversations and educational pieces with our youth. And then for the folks that are no longer young, like for example, I talk to,
some elderly folks in my family, it's like, they'll say, oh, we don't have much time left. Well, true, you don't have much time left, but let's say that you want something. Let's say that you want to buy that last house. Let's say that your descendants are important to you. Let's say you want to be able to hand something down. Let's say that you want to create a legacy for your family and for your family name. One of the ways to do that is to spend intelligently.
Dr. George Fraser, who's written many books about economics and Black economics, has said to me, and even in a conversation on some of my shows, that we're literally heading towards a second slavery of economics in the next 30 years if we do not pick it up and keep the dollar circulating and have it reinvest itself in the community itself. Because right now we know our dollar doesn't stay in the community. We know it doesn't double. It doesn't triple. Matter of fact, it gets less and less and less. So there's a lot of other issues, and that goes with economic literacy or financial literacy.
Yeah, and I, in a lot of ways, I mean, I think we might already be there. You take a look at my grandmother, for example, never made more than $10 an hour, and I was with 2 full-time jobs. You add both of them together and she never made $10 an hour. And I mean, that level of work for that level of pay is certainly not slavery by definition, but it looks a lot like indentured servitude.
Yes.
And so, I think in some ways we're already there. And that's not to say, by the way, let me extend an olive branch here. I'm not sure that many rural white folks in West Virginia
are doing better
or are seeing this white privilege.
Right.
And so really, I think that a lot of it has to do with race, because of the systems that were set up the way they were to advantage a particular type of person. But again, I think that this is a United States thing.
It is.
This economic piece. And I think that this is the have and the have-nots thing. I'm not exactly all the way to the Bernie Sanders side, but I think that he raises some interesting points when he talks about the concentration of wealth in the top 1% and how that's getting more and more concentrated. Mm-hmm. That's not good. And frankly, and the part that really frustrates me, having studied some level of economics and majoring in the topic, that is not good for the business cycle. And they know that. But they are very short-sighted.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Get you back to your family. Get you back to the work we need to do. We're going to continue to do this work. We're going to continue to educate. And educate means to inform, but to inform so you understand. And if you don't understand, inbox us, talk to us, ask the question. Even if you don't think you're asking for help, ask the question. Get an answer, then ask someone else another question and compile information and decipher what is good for you and what isn't good for you. I hope this helps people understand that this is about a practice and a training. And I say it all the time. You're either practicing or you're training, because then you can share, then you can love, and then you can honor. And I think we can do that as people.
Dr. Paul, I couldn't have wrapped it up better myself. I think that, we hit on some very important and interesting points today. I know that we'll continue to have conversations, and I know that you'll continue to have conversations with others on this show. I hope that we are able to move the needle on some of these things. I think education is an important foundational one, and I think maybe we take a look at also looking at moving the needle on economic opportunity and economic development for our communities. I think that we can make a difference. I think that the time is now, especially in the context of everything that's going on in our country. I thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today, Dr. Paul. I hope you'll have me back, and maybe we'll be able to continue the conversation. And again, to all of the prior service members of the Army, Air Force, Navy, Marines, Coast Guard, and any affiliated auxiliary organizations, we take a little bit of time to honor those that didn't make it as far as we did. But we also take a minute to acknowledge the ones that did, who fought for our right to talk about these things. And who fight, who continue to fight so that we may have a more equal and just world. And so thank you again, Dr. Paul, and I'm sure we'll be continuing the conversation.
Because one of the things I want to say real quick, Memorial Day saddens me. It is not a cookout celebration for me. It actually sombers me and sobers me when I really heartily reflect on, and a commercial talks about get no money down on a car doing on Memorial Day. Now that bothers me to commercialize people who have died for this country. Really hurts. It really bothers me. I just want to put that out there. So thank you.
Well, we commercialize quite a bit in this country, and so I'll be looking forward to Christmas decorations starting next month. But I just going back to it again. I hope you enjoyed the long holiday. We look forward to Juneteenth. Yes. And having further conversations about what that day means, and I'm sure that you'll on your program be educating folks about what went on in Texas and how it took so long for those folks to get the message and why we celebrate June 19th. So again, Dr. Paul, thank you for your time.
Absolutely. God bless, man.
You as well.